Welcome to the next episode of Just Peachy. I'm Peachie Thompson and I'm your host. Just Peachy is a show where we interview leaders and subject matter experts in the fields of insurance, finances, taxes. This is for the consumers, so once or twice a month we do have fun and we talk about everything and anything under the sun. I am so excited to introduce you the next speaker who I love because I can relate to her life story. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Elgon Financial Advisors, Miss Jane Mepham.
Thank you so
Jane,
much, Peachy.
welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Jane, so I love what you do for immigrants. You specialize, you're a financial planner, you help immigrants. I'm a first generation immigrant, so I'm just going to let you tell our viewers your story so they get to know who you are and what you do.
Okay, that sounds great. So, I own, as you already indicated, Algon Financial Advisors. And the reason why I started the firm, it's an investment and planning firm, was because I felt like immigrants, foreign-born individuals and families were really struggling, still struggle to work with financial advisors in the country. So going back to give you a little bit of my history, I came to the US on an F1 visa. And as you know the story, it's challenging. So moving through the whole immigrant story, as I like to call it, went from F1 to OPT to H1B, green card holder, and finally became a citizen. Obviously, that was a couple years, and there were lots of challenges as I went through that. And the one thing I always realized as I went through was I'm in what I'd call an academically don't want to use the word challenge, but being in computer science and a lot of the immigrants that come here, they tend to be pretty sharp. But the one thing we all seem to struggle with is finances. And the reason we struggled with it, not because we didn't know, for example, how to budget, but because, for example, the US uses completely different terminology from what we use back home, wherever back home is. There's different products, there's different plans, retirement plans, all that sort of thing. And so when you think about the fact that our parents really sent us to the US to get a great education and to better our lives and our families, money is a big part of that. And if you really don't understand how the financial system is working, that can be a big issue. For me, this happened when I started my first job and they said, okay, Jane, you got some great benefits. Here's your 401k. And I had no clue, no idea what I was doing. And what HR said to
What's
me is,
401k, right?
exactly what they said to me is
Yeah.
that's how you save for retirement. And so I realized with having all those questions, a lot of immigrants are still having the same questions. And so fast forward a couple of years, we still have those questions. And so I really felt like I needed to start something that would educate, that really would help immigrants. And I keep saying immigrants, anybody who's foreign born, with really getting into this system.
Right, right. And definitely there were a lot of, as an immigrant, you already have to learn a different language most of the time. And not only is the proper use of that language, but mostly the slang. And then you have all these terminologies that just is very, very foreign to you, right? So budgeting is one of them. I know as an immigrant, when you're just starting out, you go to a new country, you're starting out. I don't think there really is such thing as thinking ahead, right? I'm probably speaking for myself because, well, I was very young when I came to the U.S., so I couldn't really even think about what is budgeting, plan for retirement, what is this insurance, paying taxes, what are these things? So what would you say, a client comes to you, what is the first thing that you talk to them about? What should they be thinking about when they first come to the U.S.?
So when they first arrive, we're literally talking survival, as you understand. It's day to day, probably
Yes.
paycheck to paycheck. So what you want to help them with at that stage is really managing what they have. That's the first thing. And understanding what the priorities are. So do we need to be paying rent, for example? You mentioned insurance. At what point do we need to be thinking about insurance? But really, it's basic survival. So step by step, let's pay rent, for example. That's like the most basic thing. We want to make sure we can survive in the system, and then we can start adding
Yes.
on to that. Now education, I find, is a big part of why a lot of immigrants come to the US. So that's likely to be right at the top of the list. And again, a lot of
Right.
immigrants will come in, like they're coming to go to college, for example. So depending on where they're coming from, what stage of life they're in, we'll have different strategies for them. And so you're right, somebody that just arrived, okay, it's like I said, survival and making sure you maintain your legal status. Let's move on. Let's say you're done with college, you're starting a new job. Chances are you're going to be starting that job on a work visa. That's another whole different set of issues that we'll be talking about. So it all depends on what stage you're in.
Right, right. So, what do you think is the biggest challenge immigrant will face when they first land in the U.S.? Or I should say, when we first come to the U.S., besides the language, the language barrier is I know it's a big thing for a lot of people. Second is the survival, right? Like you said, let's
Correct.
let's look at make sure we have a house, make sure we have food, just the basic needs. Apart from that, what becomes the next challenge?
So the next challenge is they'll start hearing about you need to do financial planning, you need to save for retirement, you need to do insurance, you need to do estate planning. And again, it's very different from the way it's done in their home countries, or they may not even be an equivalent. So the next stage is to now, the next challenge is to probably find somebody that understands where they're coming from and that speaks their language. And when I say speaks their language, I don't mean the English language. I mean speaks in a way
Right?
to say, I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yes.
Knowing where you're coming from, a good example, and I think you and I have talked about this, is where you don't have long-term insurance. You're your parents' long-term insurance care. So understanding that, so
Yes.
finding somebody that really understands where they're coming from, the cultural issues that they're likely to be facing, is a big part of it. And then on top of everything, and we'll probably talk a little bit about this, is tax planning. That's a big one when you're an immigrant and you got one foot in the US and one foot in another country.
Right, right. So that's a lot of stuff right there, and
You know.
absolutely, in a lot of cultures, I'm in my culture in particular. There's no such thing as long-term care. Long-term care, like you said, is family. You take care of grandma when they grow old. It's not. It's not like, yeah, we're gonna put her in a facility and we save enough, or we have this insurance to pay for it. Family is the insurance. That's the culture. And as far as giving back, this is something that's huge in many cultures, where you're working here in the US, you're earning that top dollar and you're sending it back home, right? So picture this, you're having to survive in the US, then you're having to send back money. Why? Most of the time because it's love, right? You have people that you love back home. And I imagine that's quite challenging for a financial planner.
I know. And I love that you said you're doing this because you love the people back home. Absolutely. I've spoken to a lot of folks who tell me there's an article I wrote a while back that says you're your parents' retirement plan. And I had a few people reach out to me and say, that's me. When they send me over, they said I'm the retirement plan. So I think a big part of that is the way I think about it is we come from very different cultures and we're coming into a completely new culture. what we want to do is take the good out of those two cultures, mix them, and we'll come out stronger. So, as a financial advisor, if you come to me, for example, we start looking at your spending plan. These days, I normally just say, and how much money do you need to be sending home? Like, I already know you need to be doing this. If not,
It's
that's okay. But I'm giving them permission to talk about, yes, I do need to send money home because I need to educate my brothers, sisters, cousins, whatever. I need to be supporting family back home. So we'll say, okay, let's include that in your spending plan, in your budget, and go from there. So as a financial advisor, I look at that as this is who you are. This is what makes you,
right.
this is important to you. And so we are going to do what's important to you. And then we'll figure out if we need to cut other areas, we need to have you making more money. But if this is important to you, yes, we are going to do it.
Yes. Oh, I love that approach. There is no judgment there, right? There is
Correct.
just let us see what's most important to you and put it in the spending plan. So spending plan, if I don't think I've heard that terminology when I first came to the US. I don't think a lot of immigrants have heard of that until they've spoken to someone who has some idea on we gotta have a spending plan, right? So do you get I'm curious, do you get clients coming to you and just kind of looking at you and saying, that's not gonna work, Jane. That's just not gonna work.
What do you mean that's not going to work? Having a spending plan or?
Yes, yes. Has anyone ever said to you, I can't do that, it's too hard?
I think what I've typically had is when I say budget, people think, oh, you don't want me to spend money. Okay. And so when I talk about a spending plan, the way I explain it is you are making money over here and we're going to spend it over here. So how do we spend the money that you're making in the best way possible? And we start going through that. And I have different spreadsheets for different people depending on how they work. Some will prefer to use software. And then what I'll say to them is once we've spent it or we put everything down, it's okay. If we have holes, we need to figure out what else we need to do. And that seems to help people, especially when I started just talking about a spending plan versus a budget. And the thing that you talked about, no idea of shame, is to say it's okay even if you've spent it all. Let's figure out
Mm,
what we need to do next month. And what I tend to go back to is a lot of, and we'll talk about this like right at the beginning of the meeting. You've told me you came to the US, for example, and these are the things that you want to achieve. We've dreamed together. This is your future ideal version where you want to get to. And some of them will be things like, oh, I want to be traveling places, for example. I want to have this house. Some will even go and be very specific. I want to own a house in this town and I want it to look like this, whatever the case may be. And so we go all through this. I keep bringing this back to say, remember when you came to me, you told me this is where you want to go. It may not happen today or tomorrow, it may not happen next year. It could be 3 years down the road. So as long as we keep you focused on that, it does seem to make it a little bit easier for folks to say, okay, let me know what we need to do to kind of get to that end goal. So really getting them excited about the future goal and kind of painting that seems to help a little bit.
that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. You show them the goal, you remind them of that goal. And when it's not probably a question of if, but when they are not doing what they're supposed to do, then you're able to reel them back in and say, hey, this is the goal. This is what you need to do. Let's make some adjustments. And there again, there is no judgment there. So that's awesome. That's awesome. So taxes, right? There's only two things in life. I always say this. Two things in life, at least here in the US, right, that's certain. You're going to pay taxes and you're going to die
Yes.
at some point, right? So
Yes.
taxes. Let's talk about that.
So tax planning is a big part of being foreign born. The first thing I'll talk to folks about is I'll tell them IRS or the government has made it very clear that your immigration status is not your tax resident status. And that's the first thing I have to explain. So the US has what's called citizenship based taxation, which means you could be living on the moon or some other planet or in another country, but as long as you've become a US tax resident, and that means you're a citizen or a green card holder, you will be taxed on your worldwide income. So that's the first thing. The next part I'll explain is to be a tax resident in the US. One, when you're on F1 visa, that's a little different. It's all based on how many days you've been in the country. Okay. So they use this interesting formula where over the last 3 years, you've been in the country over 183 days, and there's a formula they use. Once you get to that, it's called substantially presence test, you are a tax resident. So a really good example to give you is somebody's come here and they're working on an H-1B visa, they got a great job. After the first year, because they've been here more than 183 days, they are going to be considered tax residents. They are tax residents for the US, even though they're on an immigrant visa. So that's the first thing. The next thing I'll tell them is because of your now tax residency status, you need to pay taxes on your worldwide income. You know that property you have back home that's giving you rental income? We need to be reporting that and we need to be paying that. So that's the first thing I have to explain to people and really make sure they understand what worldwide taxation means. So once we get that, a lot of folks are like, "Ugh," and it's like, no,
Wow.
it's okay. It's okay. The things we can do to mitigate some of that, because they're very concerned about things like double taxation and that sort of thing. And I'll say it's still okay to send money back home, but just be aware these are the tax implications. So that's the first thing we always talk about, the fact that you will be paying taxes on your worldwide income as long as you're a US tax resident. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So if we have listeners right now thinking, what? I did not know that. So before they signed up to stay here for longer than whatever the formula said you're supposed to maximize before you become before your worldwide income is taxable, right? Probably something to think about. So I'm curious about that. So
Yeah.
say someone came here and they know what the formula said. This is the X number of days. If it's 183 days, 183 days it is, right? So I leave at 180 days, go back to my country, and then come back. Does that thing reset or no?
It counts it's physical presence. So you
Ah,
could have come
okay.
here to go to Disney. Guess what? Those days count, even though you left. So it's really important. This is what I say to folks to make sure you work with a CPA that understands that. And again, it's
Yes.
explaining you don't need to be afraid of it. It's just understanding these are the implications. Because if you end up, let's say, filing taxes as a non-tax resident, for example, as an F1 student, you only file taxes as non-tax resident, there are also some tax benefits that you don't get. So there's pros and cons of either. And the way I look at it is let's just understand where you fall in, and then we can
Right.
start talking tax planning strategies based on that. So it is an interesting one, and it's one that I find folks ask a lot of questions about.
Oh, sure. I imagine, I mean, you're coming here to study or to work, and you're thinking, oh, great, I have this paycheck coming. And you see the taxes, right? Because when you get your pay stub, you're like, what are these things? They take this
Right,
much
right.
for that much, right? So, and then you're thinking now, and most immigrants who are financially sound, I would say, they do have assets back home,
Correct.
right?
Yes,
And the
yes.
moment you start thinking about that, they have houses back home, they have some sort of savings because not only, a lot of this money that come from the US, apart from paying for cousin's school or nephew, niece, and brother, sister, mom, grandma, grandpa, or whatever, is that somehow it's the money there's still left over to put towards something. That much I know by experience with a lot of friends and and family, that's done that. So What a it's not, it's almost like a rude awakening, right? Where you're just like, what do you mean I'm working
Yes.
so hard and now I
Yes,
got to
I
worry
know.
about these things? So it's really important to have someone to let you know that these things can happen or they do
Correct.
happen.
Right. And one thing that I don't want to leave it like that is there are things called like foreign tax credits that will mitigate the idea of double taxation, which is what a lot of, once people learn this, they're like, oh, I'm paying taxes twice. And you explain, like I said, the foreign tax credit, which will give you credit for taxes that you paid overseas. So there is
Makes
that.
sense.
There's also tax treaties. The U.S. has tax treaties with maybe around 70 countries when I checked last, and these tax treaties will also help with the whole double taxation issue. Because when you think about it, it's not only the U.S. If you're in those other countries, people have become
Oh, they're
so
looking.
mobile globally. They're all over the place. And the countries
Yes.
do want to encourage them to do that. So one way of doing that is the whole idea of tax treaties with the different countries to make sure you're not double taxed. So
Yes.
understand that is a key thing. Understand what tax treaty applies and understand if they're foreign tax credits. Most of the time they are, that you can take advantage of. So the idea is to be honest and report things, but make sure you're working with a CPA that understands the tax treaties, the foreign tax
Yes.
credits, for example, in other things like that. So again, you're not being double taxed.
Yes. Oh, thank goodness, right? Because no, here you are, you're listening, you're like, what do you mean I do that? There is that. We get tax treaties,
Yes,
we can get credits, and
correct.
that is very good to know. And like you said, it is
Yes.
important that we're working with someone who knows these things. Otherwise, it could be very intimidating. It could be very complex for people. You know, some people don't like dealing with these things, and it's natural.
Yeah,
There's nothing wrong with it, right?
yeah, this
So,
definitely the fear of dealing with the government. You're right, absolutely. So let me add one more thing. This might be helpful. The other thing that happens is, and this is the one that gets a lot of people, if you have foreign accounts and these accounts, any one day they're more than 10K, you need to report that, but you're not reporting it to be taxed on. It's more being transparent. So that's the other thing I talk to people about, because you're right, you're sending money home to cousins and to all these people, and you probably are sending it to one of your accounts. Any day that account reaches 10K, we need to report it. You won't be taxed on it, but the government does want to know about this money. And the thing I also tell people is they already know, because there was a law that was passed in
yeah.
2010 that causes the banks, overseas banks, to report this information to IRS. So they already know these things. For you, it's just a matter of sort of confirming it. So again, something to keep in mind.
Yes. And you know, it's really honesty is the best policy. Transparency is key. It's the same with everything that we deal with in life, in our finances. Insurance is the same. You're applying for insurance, you forget to disclose something, that becomes a red flag. In the same manner that you said, the IRS already knows, they're just trusting but verifying. Now you gotta come out clean and say, yeah,
Right.
I do have that. You know, that is
Right,
mine,
right.
right?
Agree, agree,
Yeah,
agree.
yeah. Wow. Well, this is really very interesting. What would you say, Jane, is the best advice you can give someone who is just starting out, just fresh, coming to the country and just really have, like, you know, like you and I when we first started here, nobody was there to say, here, let me help explain these things to you, right? So what is the best advice you could give someone who
So
just got here starting their lives?
looking back, I think the best thing or the best advice somebody would have given me is to learn all I can about personal finance. learn how the system works. And now we have the internet, so there's a lot of information
Mm,
out there. But every
right.
bit that you learn, right, before you act on it, try and have look at it through your immigrant's eyes, because the information that's going to be out there is sort of written for somebody that's in the country, lives here, all that stuff. So learn all you can, but always look at it or see that information through your immigrant eyes. And if you're not sure what that means for you in that situation, then obviously reach out to somebody like me. The other thing I also said to somebody that's just arrived is, as immigrants, we sometimes tend to just want to stick with our own kind, which it's very comforting because you can tell jokes
Yes.
and people understand. There's probably going to be food that you're very comfortable with. Get yourself a little bit uncomfortable and reach out and start integrating with the community around you, those who were not born in your country. It does give you another perspective about life in the US. Plus, to me, it helps you integrate a little bit faster. And I spoke to somebody a while back and they said, I think sometimes one of the things that causes people here to, don't want to say be afraid. We tend to be afraid of what we don't know. And so when you start
Sure.
integrating and people get to know you a little bit more, they realize, oh, you're just a human being like me. You just happen to have been born in a different country.
Yes.
The other one I'm thinking of is take advantage of what I call our immigrant mindset. For us to have come here, that is huge.
Oh,
We believed we
yes.
could do it, right? And so that mindset that gets you to believe anything is possible, it's going to serve us really, really well here. And part of it is to, I always think to myself is, I know there's another way of doing things. This is not the only way of doing things because I grew up in a different culture. We did things and we were successful. So use that immigrant mindset. It's a strength, if you ask me. Think of the difference as a strength and let's take advantage of it. So I feel like if you can take advantage of those three things, you make it.
Those are some very wise words, Jane. And really, I feel what you say. Use your immigrant mindset because it is very, very powerful to think that you are here. It is the land of opportunity. And what you do is what you get. What you get at the end is what you worked on. And really what it is if you can look at it that way, it makes a huge difference. So thank you for that. Is there anything else that, I could talk with you all day. You know that, right? So, but we don't want to have an hour long podcast. So, is there anything else that we should share with our viewers and our listeners? Is there anything in particular that you think we should share now?
There's a lot, but I feel like we've covered a
Yeah,
lot of it. The
yeah.
key thing is for folks to know they're not alone, for one. There is help
Mhm.
available. Truly, as you said, the US is the land of opportunity. Let's make the most of that opportunity is the way I want to think about it. And if folks have questions, I'm more than happy to chat with them and kind of send them in the right direction if that helps.
Yes, with that in mind, if anyone wants to chat with you, have any questions, Jane, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you?
I think the best way is go to my website, algonfa.com. Algonfa.com. And on the homepage, I actually have a little chat button. Click on that and you can set up a time to chat with me. Algonfa.com, chat, let's chat.
Excellent. Well, Jane, I always love chatting with you. This is a treat for me. I know that it's a treat for a lot
Oh,
of our
thank
listeners as
you.
well. Thank you so much for being on the show, and I look forward to the next time we connect.
Thank you so much, Peachy. This is awesome, and thank you so much for inviting me. As you said, you and I could just go on and on and on and on. So this is great. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. I'll talk to you later. Bye bye.
Sounds good. Okay, bye.
Information shared during the show are opinions of the speakers. They are not legal, financial, or tax advice specific to you. Consult your own specialist, attorney, accountant, financial planner, or insurance advisor for your specific situation.